Hey everyone, today we're going to make a pasta arrabbiata-like sauce. And I'm saying pasta arrabbiata-like because I'm probably going to piss off some Italians by calling this a true arrabbiata, because it's probably not. It's based loosely on the recipe from this book, The Little Book of Sauces by Thomas Feller. I haven't found an English translation of this book, but it's a very cute book. And this is the recipe we're going to follow. Now you can pause here and follow the exact instructions, or you can follow my altered instructions. For this recipe, you don't need a whole lot. You just need 2 pots or 2 saucepans, and that's about it. Want to make sauce, want to cook your pastas, you can also use a pasta pan, of course. You need garlic, 2 cloves, I've used 3. You need some basil, 4 leaves, a kilogram of tomatoes. You need some bird eye chilies, which I don't have, so I've picked some bottle rocket chilies from my garden and a yatsufasu pepper. 3 tablespoons of olive oil, nothing special here, and sugar. It doesn't specify which sugar, so I'm using cane sugar because that's the sugar I prefer. And make sure you have some salt and pepper at hand, because that's always useful to have. Aside from that, I'm just having some chili flakes as a backup in case the chilies aren't spicy enough. We can add that to the mix. Now, I've already pre-sliced everything to save you the hassle of watching me slice things, because that's not one of my fortes. But I will show you how to make the tomatoes, how to dice them and skin them and all that sort of stuff. So we'll do that next, and then we'll move into our cooking phase. Alright, so the first step with the tomatoes is to remove the little crown thing. You can usually just pluck it right off, and then you'll slice a little cross across the bottom of the tomato. I meant to make it a little bit of a big cross because it's just easier to grip the skin like that, and then you just plop it into some boiling water. That doesn't have to be violently boiling. As long as it's boiling, that's fine. I was a bit of an idiot and I put too little water in the pan, so I have to ladle it a little bit to make it hot all the way around. If this happens to you, that's a way to deal with that. And you can also just kind of flip it over halfway through. Most guides say about a minute of boiling. I tend to stick to about 1.5 minutes for these bigger tomatoes, because shorter times just don't seem to work as well. So we just need to wait a little bit until the tomatoes are ready. For this I use a cooking timer, but since I'm not using the audio because the fume hood was rather loud, we're just going to have to wait through, and eventually this is the point where I flip it over. And just make sure it's hot. That's good enough. It doesn't need to be a boiled tomato, it just needs to be hot. Now the next step is to dunk it into some cold water, so make sure you have some cold water at hand. And 1.5 minutes is really long when you're waiting for it. But this gives you a good idea of the process. Also important to note is that you can just chain the tomatoes one after another, heating them, then cooling them, and then putting them aside. The skin will still come off even when the tomatoes are cold, so you don't have to do them one at a time and then deskin and cut them one at a time like I'm doing here. This is just for the demonstration. So here it goes into the cold water. Just make sure it's nice and submerged. And give it a good little rest to make sure it properly cools down. It's a little bit like with eggs when you want to take the shell off, where you boil them and then put them into cold water. And this is the point where I decide to add a little bit more water to the pot, because it's a bit annoying having to deal with the ladling stuff to get this going, but we'll demonstrate in a second that even like this it still works just fine. Now the tomato itself shouldn't be hot, so it shouldn't be a problem to handle it. If your tomato is hot, you're taking it out of the water too early. Also, using a bigger bowl is recommended when doing a lot of tomatoes. Right, so what you want to do is just peel the skin. Sometimes it's a little bit finicky, sometimes it tears a little bit, but it should come off quite easily. Now, if you're really averse to slimy textures, it would be a good idea to put on some gloves, because this is a bit of a slimy endeavor. But in general, you can quite easily peel them, and if one part doesn't peel easily, just go to another part, and usually it just wraps around and you can just kind of take it off fairly easily. Now, the entire process will take a little bit of time when you have several tomatoes, so make sure you do this well ahead of cooking. You can just skin the tomatoes and stick them in the fridge, or just prepare it entirely and stick it in the fridge just fine. So there you go. That's a skinless tomato. There's some autofocusing issues. It should look like that. Now I can just throw these skins away and cut the tomato into 4. Be careful, as the tomatoes are quite slippery and it's not fun to cut yourself. Now, the next thing we do is we kind of wedge the tomato. This is probably not a recommended technique, as it's a little bit dangerous for your fingers if you let it slip, but usually you can quite easily cut into the white part of the tomato and just scoop out the center bit. The goal is here to remove the white, that's the most important part, and then remove the seeds. Now, I'm not too precious with removing the seeds, because this is not a completely smooth sauce. If this was like a ketchup, I would remove all the seeds. In this case, it's okay for a few seeds to stay behind. We're just going to slice it into small dices. I prefer small dices because I don't like big chunks. If you're not averse to chunky sauces, you can just leave it a lot bigger than this. And just quickly let me show you that from another angle. The peeling is a little bit hard to get your fingers between it, but once you have your fingers, it should just rip straight off. It's especially hard to do this on camera and show the entire process, but there you go. It should come off really easily. If you have troubles removing the skin, you're probably either using water that isn't hot enough, or you're boiling too short, so lengthen the boiling time a little bit and it should become this easy. On particularly hard bits, you can also use the point of a knife to get it loose, but in general I found that this is not needed at all. Now let's just get a second angle on the cutting bit. So just cut into it sideways, make sure to remove the top ends, focus on the white bits, and just cut across. And you should be able to lift out the center bit quite easily. Now, in this one, the alignment was a bit weird, but the white parts are not really stuck to the skin, so you can just sort of lift them out quite easily and remove them that way. It's not a hard process, it just takes some time, and then just slice it into, or rather dice it into small dices. As you can see, it's okay to leave a little bit of the center bits, but just make sure it isn't white, because that will mess with the consistency of your sauce. Alright, so with our saucepan slightly preheated, doesn't have to be scorching hot, we're going to add the oil. And we're going to use the garlic press to add the garlic. Now, the original recipe says to slice the garlic. I personally prefer to press it. Just makes it a little bit more uniform. Which I think for a sauce makes sense. There we go. Just get it all in there. Make sure we're on low fire. Mix it up. Going to add the onions. This is a variation on the recipe. We're using red onions because those are the onions I prefer. The recipe doesn't really specify which kind of onions. I've cut up 2 onions because these are smaller onions, and because we're making quite a sizable batch, I figured it would be good to have a little bit of extra. Now the peppers I've used I'm going to use are the bottle rocket pepper, and those are about as sharp as the recommended bird's eyes. The Yatsufasu is slightly less sharp. I think it rates about the same as a Spanish pepper or red chili pepper. I will be dumping these in whole, so we need to grab those out in the end. And I'm going to cut up the other pepper, even though the recipe says you need to dump them all in. I prefer to just add the pepper. Get a little bit of extra heat in there. We might regret this. If we do, I will leave a little annotation, but I think we'll be fine. All right. This needs to heat for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we can move on. But in the meantime, we can prepare the pepper. Make sure to occasionally stir. So the garlic doesn't burn. Once the onions are nice and soft and glazy, you can add the tomato. So dump it in there. We're also going to add a little bit of salt and pepper, although in this stage I recommend to not do too much because it's easier to dose once you're at the end of the sauce phase. So we're just going to 2 big turns. And just a sprinkling of pepper. And give that a good mix. While we were waiting for the onions and the garlic, I've cut up the last pepper, which is now quite finely chopped. And we'll add that as well. And make sure you're on low heat. Just going to let this sit for 20 minutes with the lid on. Now if you don't have a fancy sauteuse, it would probably be smart to every couple of minutes give it a bit of a stir to make sure it doesn't burn. But with these pans you're usually safe. So we're just going to lid it, and I will see you in about 20 minutes once I've found my lid. There we go. Alright, so that's 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes we're left with this. And now we just have to let it boil for another 20 minutes so it thickens until a sauce-like consistency. And that's another 20 minutes done. Our sauce is starting to look pretty nice and thick, so we can take out the peppers. There's 1. There's 2. Now we can add the basil. Now I've sliced it because I think whole leaves are a bit much. Give that a good stir. And we also have to add the sugar to balance out the acidity. So it's 1 teaspoon for starters, and then we can kind of taste and see where to go from there. I'm going to leave it on the fire for a little longer, and in the meantime you can cook your pastas of choice. So that's pretty spicy. Definitely doesn't need any more chili peppers, so that's good. I think we're actually quite good on sugar as well. I'll just let this be for a little bit until we wait for the pasta to be done. Let's put the lid on it. And make sure the fire is off. Alright, and with the pasta done, we can turn up the heat low and add our pastas. Give that a nice good stir. You can just serve it as is or with cheese. depending on your preferences. And there you have it, a pasta arrabbiata style sauce. Bon appetit.